Russia has been targeting electricity stations and also dams, but it does look from a military perspective as this is more in retribution and in frustration at the Ukrainian attacks' success for the last couple of days. The front line itself hasn't moved very much, if at all, over the last 24 hours. If we look at Kharkiv, first of all, the Ukrainian success, they have liberated around an area of land about half the size of Wales, very significant. From a military perspective, a tremendous success, but it absolutely does not portend the end of the war for Russia. Russia's focus has always been on the Donbass. You can see the outline here of the black. That yellow area that's been liberated is not part of the Donbass. The Russians were in there, but they were faced with a choice with a very successful counterattack. Do they fight and therefore risk losing soldiers and potentially getting some of their soldiers isolated in Izium? Or was it better to withdraw the forces in an orderly manner and live to fight another day? They chose the latter. The order came through to withdraw. Some of the forces withdrew in an orderly manner, but some of them clearly did not, as some of the devastation we've seen on the battlefield. It's not all bad news for Russia, though, because that was outside the main area. Now the front line for the Russians is shorter, makes it easier to defend. The density of Russian forces now, because it's a smaller area, means the density of forces is higher, and therefore it makes it easier for them to consolidate. Not all bad news. Russia would not have liked losing that land, but it's not the end of the fight. If we look now at Kherson, at the sort of more southwest of the region, let's remind ourselves why Kherson is important. It's important because it's a stepping stone if Russia ever wants to go for Odessa. It controls the fresh water down to Russian-held Crimea, and also because the nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhia was isolated from Crimea, taken off the electrical grid before. Now, a very different approach for the Ukrainians when they deal with Kherson. You can't encircle Kherson because it's on the western side of the Dnipro River here, and they certainly don't want to do a full-scale attack onto an urban environment. That could be very costly. So what their plan is they're isolating the Russian forces there, blowing the bridges across the Dnipro River. The Russians have been trying to build some Meccano bridges using pontoons. The Ukrainians continue to successfully target those, basically to isolate the Russian forces. The population of Kherson are very resistant to the Russians as well, and all of it's trying to erode the morale of the Russian forces, take them away from their support, and force Russia into a choice, really, as we approach winter. Do you leave the forces in Kherson and risk them surrendering or being destroyed, or do you withdraw them from the city and let them live for another day? We will have to wait and see what happens on that front. For us, though, the key issue here is timing. It's been really interesting, given the winter window, which will be more difficult for fighting to take place, why this is so important for Ukraine. Two main reasons, really. The first one is morale. President Zelenskyy and his people and his soldiers have been effectively losing a war for the last 6 months. Their soldiers need to be able to demonstrate that they can take on the Russians on the battlefield with Western weapons and prevail. And they've done that. And likewise, whilst the Ukrainian people have suffered dreadful privations and invasion forces, the people of Izium have now been liberated. And that will send a really powerful message of hope to the rest of the country. The other reason, of course, is the international community. President Zelenskyy is heavily reliant on money and weapons, Western weapons, to prevail in this fight. If the West believed that Ukraine was a lost cause, the challenge would be the support would start to dry up. The successes of this operation are very firmly give Ukraine hope and the international community hope that President Zelenskyy can prevail and push out the Russians. The challenge, of course, for the future is what's Russia and President Putin's next steps.